Good morning and welcome to The Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Kenny McBride and joining me today is Daye Tucker, a farmer and a leader in the Scottish Enterprise Rural Leadership Programme. So our first story this morning is a really tragic one, the story about the mass shooting in an El Paso Walmart where a white supremacist, spurred on by President Trump's racist anti-immigration rhetoric, killed 20 people, wounded 26 others in a warped response to what he called the Hispanic invasion of Texas. The president did later tweet condemnation of the attack, but US Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke has linked Trump's rhetoric to the El Paso shooting. And then, of course, we've also seen this morning news of another shooting in Dayton, Ohio. We have a bit less information on that one. But Daye, what do we make of this? Another mass shooting in the US. It seems like they happen almost every other day now. What do we think, first of all, about this one in particular, this white supremacist or white nativist attack, and the problem more generally?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing we all think about is the people who've been affected and their families and the impact that this is going to have on their lives, because, okay, it's a bigger, wider issue, but we were always taught in the Rural Leadership Programme to think global and act local. So it's down at the local level that the real impacts are felt. And those of us who are observing what's going on in America really are cushioned at the moment by distance and by different governments. But we're right on the verge. We really need to be very, very careful in this country, I think, because, well, I don't mean in Scotland, I mean in the UK as a whole, because it all does boil down to leadership. And you can have good leadership and you can have bad leadership. We, I think, have got leadership in America that is not good. And this is a result of this. Okay, it's always gone on, but not to the extent. It's been normalised in America by bad leadership.
So we have obviously heard Trump repeatedly talk about building the wall, keeping people out, which I always think is incredibly ironic for a man whose own mother was an immigrant, as his mother, of course, was Scottish. Not that we claim Donald Trump as our own, but virtually everybody in America, with the exception of the actual natives who have been marginalised in pretty radical ways,
is an immigrant.
Is an immigrant, or is the child of
Yes.
or the descendant of immigrants at least. Is there a way, do you think, that the US can kind of turn back from this? Do you think there is a path forward that doesn't have this nativist rhetoric attached to it?
I think only through good leadership, of which there is a dearth at the moment. But even then, even with previous leaders who could be termed as good leaders, there was still this undercurrent going on. And it's perhaps because America is such a supposedly free society, that these kind of thoughts are allowed to come up to the surface every now and then. But it takes a good leader to control them into something positive as opposed to something negative.
Well, this is something that I've often said about the situation in Britain, is that as UKIP and other even more reactionary forces have grown south of the border, excuse me, I think some of that resentment that a lot of people feel about politics in general and about the state of the economy and all these things, I think in this country, a lot of that resentment has been channeled by the SNP
Yes.
towards a vision of independence, which is perhaps more positive than the image of independence that
Yes.
UKIP, say, promotes.
Yeah. But not just that. It's been channeled into a recognition of the positive contribution that immigrants bring to Scotland.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas the positive contribution that immigrants bring to UK, which is real, no less real than it is in Scotland, has not been channeled in a positive way. And at the Conservative conference, when was it, 2017, I think, they actually played on the UKIP, rhetoric about immigrants being not contributing to society. So that was an opportunity for leadership from Theresa May, and she absolutely blew it and took everybody in the other direction.
We have talked quite extensively on Broadcasting Scotland about Lisanne Zeitzman. I'm not sure how aware you are of that case, but a business owner in Arran who's running a cafe, is employing locals, is generating business with local farms and local bakery and everything. Yeah. And she has just recently been deported.
I do know
to South Africa, where she's actually never lived. It's where her parents are from, but she's been sent back there. Do you think there's anything that perhaps we in Scotland could be doing more of in that respect? In terms of preventing these kind of things happening, and maybe finding a way to welcome more immigrants, because certainly there are parts of Scotland where we could use a lot more people moving in.
Well, I think we do. We try our best, and certainly our own government, our Holyrood government, is doing its best. But unless we have control of, or not even control, but a say in these individual cases, because they are individual cases, but we've got no say. We're kept out of it altogether, just like Scotland has been kept out of the discussions over Brexit. They've not been kept out, but they've not been kept in the discussions. So unless we have some sort of say over immigration of our own contributors to Scottish society, I can't see it getting any better.
And when we look at the whole issue of mass shootings, now obviously the US has very different gun laws to us. They have the Second Amendment. Everybody, in theory, is entitled to own guns. When I was young, we had the Dunblane shooting, obviously, and after that there were some quite restrictive gun laws put in place. And to the best of my knowledge, I can't recall another mass shooting in Britain since then.
No, there weren't mass shootings. There were one or two sort of machete attacks. Was there not something in a couple of school playgrounds?
There were a couple of other attacks.
It died down.
And obviously, it's not like Britain and Glasgow especially hasn't had a problem with violence. But do you think there's? I don't know how much you follow American politics, but
I try not to. It's too depressing.
Do you imagine that there is any possibility of real gun reform there?
There's little hints and signs of a door opening slightly, but not enough, because the gun lobby is so powerful. And the way they conduct their politics, the politicians are just puppets. They're not leaders. They're puppets of the outside influences. And with the Cambridge Analytica exposure, you can see why things are going on in America the way they are.
And just finally on this issue, clearly rational people don't take their guns to Walmart and shoot 20, kill 20 people, wound 26 others. Do you think there's something that can be done about just the general mental health I think this probably applies to people in this country as well. We have seen, for example, the attack during the Brexit referendum campaign, where a sitting MP was killed. We've seen other acts of violence and threats and whatnot, again towards minorities. Do you think there's anything in our mental health systems that we could do to help with these kind of issues, or do you think that these are just lone wolves that are going to spring up and we just have to deal with them as they come along?
I read or heard somewhere, I think it was a ex-Russian ambassador who was being asked about all of the influence that was going on social media from Russia, and Putin bad and all the rest of it. And he came up with something very interesting. He said Putin wasn't actively involved, or Russia wasn't actively involved in a lot of this stuff, but what he's very good at is making use of useful idiots. So if you've got impressionable minds, or the opposite, like Trump, where they've got this weird power thing, these are impressionable minds, so you can manipulate them. And the video or the film that's come out, I've forgotten what it's called again, on Netflix. Just let me see what it's called. The sooner that gets out into the public domain,
I think that is the
more
big
broadly.
Hack. Is that?
Yes, The Great Hack.
The Great Hack, yeah.
Now, a young friend of mine who's not at all political, and really doesn't keep up to speed at all with politics, she had seen this on Netflix, and she was absolutely, out of her mind about it. She said, "How can this happen? Is this real?" She couldn't believe that it was actually happening. Whereas people like myself, who've been following Carol Cadwallader and all the other ones, our very own Adam Ramsey from Scotland, we've known about it for a long, long time. But how do you get that past the mainstream media, which is controlled by a few people in that power group who are doing the manipulating, to the ordinary voters on the street? I don't know. And Broadcasting Scotland's doing its best, but hey ho.
We do try, but
the funding isn't there.
We don't have the greatest reach in the world, at least not yet.
Yes.
But anyway, to move on to some slightly, I don't know if this is more cheerful news exactly. The Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, that's now reduced the Tories' majority to just one. And now we have some senior Tories so implacably opposed to a no-deal Brexit. Do you think it's possible that they'll vote with the opposition in a confidence vote to bring on a general election, just to...
What, the Lib Dems?
Just to run time down?
The Lib Dems would...
Sorry, some of the Tories.
Some of the Tories. Well, yes, I do hope so, and they've certainly been muttering about it. But then I heard on the radio this morning somebody commenting that it might only be one or two, and that could be counterbalanced by people in the Labour Party, some in the Labour Party, who either might abstain or might, support the Tories. So it's still on a knife edge. Yeah,
it's with a majority of one, virtually everything is going to be on a knife edge, especially given that both parties, both the Labour and Tories, are split.
Yeah.
Do you think, I guess the real question is, do you think Labour will have the guts to propose a no confidence vote?
No. I don't have any confidence in the Labour Party either.
Yeah. Well, it is something of a concern that at the moment it doesn't seem like there is a viable plan from the Labour Party, whether for Brexit or to find a way to stay in. It does seem like neither are likely to come up with much of a plan. We did have a letter today from Ian Blackford to the other leaders, basically asking them to come together and coalesce to stop Brexit. I'll just read the letter. Dear leaders, I write to request that we meet urgently to combine our efforts to stop a no-deal Brexit. It is becoming increasingly clear that the possibility of a no-deal Brexit has increased, with the new Prime Minister failing to rule it out with just 3 months to go before the revised Brexit date. We know that any Brexit, particularly a no-deal Brexit, will cause unmitigated damage to our economy and to living standards right across these islands. All the evidence suggests that in Scotland alone, 100,000 jobs will be lost and GDP will be reduced by £2,300 per person, adding pressure to household budgets and our public services. We cannot allow this government to drive us off the cliff edge. While the Prime Minister and the Tories fail to act to avert this catastrophic no-deal exit, it's up to us to step up and stop this chaos. The very fact that this government is spending £6 billion for a no-deal Brexit is simply shameful, while at the same time people are turning to food banks and our public services are struggling with the pain of Tory-imposed austerity. It cannot go on. I ask that we use the summer collectively to coalesce against a no-deal Brexit. Time is short and we must act to prevent the Prime Minister destroying the futures of citizens up and down the country. If agreeable, I will make arrangements immediately. So the SNP certainly is pushing very hard to try and prevent Brexit even happening, which obviously is what they have a mandate for. The people of Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in every part of the country. And it's from polling evidence we know that support for the EU has actually grown since the Brexit vote.
Yes.
But now we're also hearing, we've heard for some time now suggestions that the Tories might prorogue Parliament, or as I prefer to call it, abolish democracy.
Democracy. That's a very good phrase.
And
well, it's not, but you know what I mean.
Dominic Cummings, who was one of the directors of the Leave campaign, is suggesting that if anybody in the Tory party tries to prevent no deal from happening, he would suggest to the Prime Minister that he call a general election and let the no deal Brexit happen during that suspension of government of Parliament, which to me seems like a horrifying idea. And of course, the convention is that during an election campaign you're not supposed to do anything radical that might tie the hands of a future government. How seriously do you think we should take this threat of the Tories just abandoning what passes for a constitution in this country and letting it happen without any sort of parliamentary involvement?
I think it's very serious. Boris Johnson, since 2016, prior to 2016, has thrown his hand in with Aaron Banks, Nigel Farage, and all the rest. Perhaps not publicly, but if you follow the people who are exposing this fraud, this voting fraud that's going on, he and Michael Gove and all the others in the Leave and the Bayou Leave and all the rest of them, they're all complicit in this takeover, coup, and because that's what it is. It's a coup. And who would have thought that 21st century Britain could cope with a takeover, coup?
Yeah, it is very disturbing, and we have seen, as with in the States, we've seen this rise in nativist rhetoric, even again from the Labour Party, going as far back as Gordon Brown with British jobs for British workers and things like that. Do you see any hope? Do you see any way out of this? Do you think Ian Blackford's call to the other party leaders can actually achieve anything?
Yes, I think it could achieve something, but it's going to need the other party leaders to just forget about the fact that we're looking for independence and focus on fighting Brexit.
Do you think that's possible, given the rhetoric that we've heard from, say, Joe Swinson, new leader of the Lib Dems, seems to be implacably opposed to even holding a vote on independence under any circumstances.
If you carry that to its ultimate conclusion, she's thinking about preserving the Union before preserving the UK.
That's an interesting way of putting it. It does seem that Brexit is going to be disastrous anyway.
Yes.
You slice it.
Yes.
I was just on Twitter just before I came in here, so I can't quote the person who I saw saying this, but they were talking about the campaign for the by-election in Shetland.
Yes.
And pointing out that the candidate, the Lib Dem candidate there, the Lib Dems, who are supposedly the anti-Brexit party, have not mentioned Brexit at all during the campaign and have instead focused entirely on we have to stop the Nats, we have to stop independence. Do you think there's going to be any flexibility from the other parties on that?
I can't see it. I know there was a discussion on Twitter about the Greens, and the Liberal Democrats might have a coalition with the Greens in Scotland. But the Greens want independence as well. So where does that leave Jo Swinson, saying she won't deal with the SNP because they want independence, and yet she'll deal with the Greens who want independence? As far as Shetland's concerned, Shetland is changing. And I think the candidate that they've got, the SNP candidate that they've got, I believe you mentioned that he was local, and he certainly seems to be very personable and capable, and he's involved in the industry up there, so he's very knowledgeable as well, and looks like a jolly good candidate, and not the usual kind of career politician that the country has been, suffering down south.
Although, Orkney and Shetland did re-elect Alistair Carmichael, so even after his court case and everything.
He may have been a good MSP, or MP he was.
Yeah.
He may have been, and local does trump national quite often.
I think probably especially
up north.
In the islands, I think.
Yes. But I was amazed. I mean, even one of a lovely farming colleague of mine who I really respected, and when the Frenchgate thing came on and Alistair Carmichael was caught, with his trousers down more or less, and he just poo-pooed it. He said, but all politicians tell lies.
Yeah. And
he dismissed it. And I thought he was a morally upstanding person.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I've found it increasingly hard to deal with the Lib Dems over the last few years. I think they've become increasingly radical in their opposition to independence.
Yes. And that began in 2007. Yeah. Because I noticed it then. Up till then, I was a Lib Dem person. My family were. We're kind of middle of the road people. Yeah. But the minute the SNP got in, they just changed overnight.
Yeah. It's very strange, and how would Joe Grimmond look at this? He was very much in favour of Scottish self-determination,
yes.
I guess.
Yes.
And it does seem that the other parties, or at least the unionist parties in Scotland now, that seems to be their only issue.
Yes.
Speaking of which, we are seeing, we think, perhaps some changes in Wales on the independence front. There was the huge march recently. We've seen Plaid Cymru leading in some of the polls, and we've even heard Carwyn Jones saying that he might have to reconsider his position on independence if Brexit goes ahead, with the Tories moving in the direction that they've been moving.
Yeah.
Is it possible that Wales is going to be independent before Scotland?
I don't think so, but I think there'll be a close second, and because they have moved very quickly. And I think the beginning of that was at the meetings between the devolved nations over Brexit, which clearly were, they didn't really get listened to, and they didn't get a say. And it was quite clear that Theresa May was keeping them shut out of these meetings, whether mentally or physically. And I think that woke them up. Mm-hmm.
So we're also seeing some changes in Scottish politics. We saw this week that Ruth Davidson's popularity has plummeted within the Tory party as a whole. It's certainly questionable how much her authority still means anything to the Scottish Tories at Westminster. What do we think the future is for Ruth Davidson and the Scottish Tories? We've also heard news, or at least rumours, recently that they are again considering becoming an independent party, which I don't think there's a place on the irony meter for that.
No.
What do we think about the position of the sainted Ruth Davidson?
Well, I think she has made her bed, and she must lie in it for a while. She's always flip-flopped from one thing to another and tried to climb the career ladder. She's been incredibly supported by the BBC and the mainstream media. She is a construct of them. And, I mean, very few voters probably know that she did used to work for them. So she's a colleague. They're supporting her. And it's become quite obvious that suddenly we've got a new Ruth Davidson by the name of Jo Swinson. So they've switched allegiance, and you just watch what they'll do with Jo Swinson.
That's an interesting thought. Ruth Davidson, I mean, this is probably a terrible thing to even think, but my cynical side always felt like she had taken her maternity leave at a very convenient time.
Yes.
That I felt like she was hoping she could be out of the picture completely while the final Brexit wrangling happened.
Yes.
And could then return to restore sanity after Brexit had happened in March. And now that hasn't happened. We saw her pick candidate after candidate in the Tory leadership campaign, and every time she picked one, they were the next one out. It seems like the Tory MPs in Westminster, the Scottish Tories in Westminster, aren't listening to what Ruth Davidson says. No. They seem to all have bent the knee to Boris Johnson.
Because all they're interested in is their jobs. They're not interested in either Scotland or the UK. They're only interested in clinging on to power. They know what a disaster Brexit is, and yet still they're saying, bring it on and we'll support you.
You make an interesting point there. How many of the Tories, not just the Scottish ones, but all, do you suppose actually do think that no deal is a good idea?
It's difficult to say because there's quite a lot of them, isn't there, overall? And if their constituencies voted to leave, they're on a bit of a sugary peg anyway. 25%? That's a random guess, very random.
It's interesting because I've noticed over this period that we've seen this shift where the rhetoric now is all about how people knew what they were voting for, which clearly nobody voted for no deal, or certainly not many people did. I'm sure some hoped that there would be just an abrupt next day we'd be gone. But the vast majority of people in the campaign, including Farage, Johnson, Gove, several others, all said, we're not talking about leaving the single market, we're talking about leaving the political institutions. And now all of that has been forgotten. At the same time, they were promising we'd have 40 trade deals lined up and ready to go on Brexit Day, which is clearly not even close to true. It was never even possible. But but it's clearly not happening.
That's right.
So,
and they go on about these mini deals.
Yeah.
Which are really not their construct.
Yeah,
these are little deals that the EU has set in store for if there's a no deal in order to protect
themselves.
To protect themselves. And this is typical of Boris Johnson and his cohorts. They'll claim something as theirs that is nothing to do with them. Yeah. Well, it's partly to do, but they haven't had any input into it.
So with all of this, we've also just seen new leaders elected in the Green Party in Scotland. Congratulations again to Patrick Harvey, who was re-elected. Commiserations to Maggie Chapman, who's a great friend of the show, who was defeated, and Lorna Slater, I think her name is. Right. I hope that's right. I do apologise if I've got that wrong. Has been appointed as the other co-leader. There's a big kind of swell of opinion now, certainly amongst the people that I talk to, that we really need to move towards independence now.
Yes.
There's a feeling amongst a lot of people I see that no deal Brexit is more or less unavoidable now, and that Scotland just has to get on the lifeboats.
Suck it up.
Do you think that's where the Scottish Government, the SNP, the Greens should be moving, or do you think they should be, as Ian Blackford is saying in that letter, focusing on trying to save the UK from itself?
I'm personally for the former, but that's because I am a risk taker anyway, and I'm quite a determined person, and I'm a confident person. But the SNP are in government, and they have to assess how the whole country in Scotland feels and what they think they could cope with and what they think their needs and wants and wishes are. So I can see why they're constantly having to try to work legally and with the other parties, rather than just saying, right, we're just going to go for independence right now. Because let's face it, legally, that's how the EU works. And they want to see us putting every effort into trying to do it legally and with compromises which the Scottish Government have already made to the UK, which have been rejected. But they can see how hard we're trying and trying to do it the right way. It won't be independence the way the Irish people had to gain their independence through violence. It certainly won't be that, because that's not what we are. But there's only so far you can push us. And I think that the UK government made a big mistake by not looking after us a lot better after the 2014 result. They actually went in the opposite direction, which is what a lot of the SNP activists warned would happen. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And they certainly have taken a mile. Well, come on, Scotland, let's get off our knees and start to stand up for ourselves.
So what do you think would be a trigger for the Scottish Government to perhaps take some more proactive steps?
Well, if there is a general election and Boris gets voted back in, I think that definitely would trigger it. Or if we were taken out on a no deal, that would trigger it. Because we, along with Northern Ireland, are going to suffer way more than the rest of the UK is in a no deal scenario. And I don't care, what they say, but it'll be better. There's no time scale that can be guaranteed because it's never been done before. So, do you want, it won't be short-term pain, it will be long-term pain. I'll be dead before there's any positive feeling if ever that should happen.
Now you are a farmer. Excuse me. What does Brexit mean to you directly and to your business?
A massive threat. I've done as much as I can, and I've been preparing for longer than 3 years. I've been preparing by manoeuvring my farm into the kind of farm that the public is happy to endorse. We're environmentally friendly, we're carbon neutral. I've had 2 carbon audits done, we're carbon neutral, very animal welfare friendly. I'm supporting the younger generation, I always have done anyway, but I've now got one of them in my farm with tremendous opportunities for him to take his own ideas forward. As I take a slight step back. I work locally. My sheep don't get trolled around markets or end up down south, apart from my poor ewes, because there is no other outlet for them. But all my lambs go, am I allowed to mention
Sure.
the name? All my lambs go to Scott Beef, which is only 17 miles up the road. So they go from the field into the trailer and into Scott Beef, and it's calm, it's quiet, it's very well run, and the people at Scott Beef are really lovely people. You know, I've always been treated politely when I go there, I've always been welcomed, I've always had great support from them. If I have any issues, I can phone them up and they will give me guidance. They'll come out and check that everything's going well with the sheep. And I'm a Marks and Spencer's approved farmer. I get inspected twice a year to make sure that I'm doing everything right. I mean, one of the questions is, do you have trees on your farm? And I can say, yes, I have trees on my farm. 25% of my farm is in trees.
Oh, excellent. Well done.
So, you know, I've done all these things, and I've aimed for the high-end market with a high-end product. And traditionally, it's the high-end products that tend to survive in moments of crisis. But beyond that, I have no control over what the politicians down south do, no control over the weather.
And have you been given much advice or support from DEFRA on what?
Oh, not
what
from
preparations
DEFRA.
to make?
No, DEFRA's down there. We have ARPID up here, and yes, we get lots of advice from them, and I make full use of it. And the Scottish Government has spent a lot of money, not direct to farmers, but on programmes for farmers to improve their knowledge and understanding, and I'm a sucker for learning, because being a new farmer, we didn't get the farm till 19 years ago. Prior to that, I was an art teacher. So my university of learning, my agricultural university, has been all these amazing workshops that the Scottish Government have funded and provided for us through the EU funding.
And what's the feeling in the farming community more generally then about Brexit?
It's very mixed. And a lot of them really haven't kept up to speed with what's going on. I mean, I'm still getting phrases like, oh, it'll not happen, the German car industry needs us, you know, simplistic stuff like that. And then you've got Liz Truss on television. I don't know if you saw that video of Liz Truss telling us what she was doing and talking about free ports.
No, I don't think I did see that one.
So if you've got a free port, the Germans can use the free port. So in fact, it's cancelling out all the threats about this, you know, the Germans are going to lose our market.
Okay.
It's crazy, and we really are led by donkeys.
Yeah, I think it was Liz Truss I saw saying that we needed to get people eating more British cheese.
Oh, dear goodness.
Which I thought was a bold economic strategy, but...
Well, in Scotland, we can say we have got people eating more Scottish cheese, because thanks to James Withers and Scottish Government and Richard Lochhead's forethought years ago, Scottish Food and Drink was set up, and the amount of cheese producers in Scotland has grown exponentially since then. Not only that, we're exporting it to France, and we did that long before the English got down to it.
We were talking the other day on the show on Thursday, I think, about Keep Scotland the brand.
Yes.
Is that something that concerns you at all, that the sort of Scotch lamb brand maybe
absolutely,
lost.
because we have a PGI
Yeah.
for the Scotch brand, which is a European initiative. I first saw the threat about 4 years ago at the Highland Show, when across from our tent, which is the National Sheep Association Scotland tent, sits at beside the main ring. Across from there was a small tent, and it had this Union Jack on it on a billboard, and it said, I think it was, "Tourism is great," but with a Union Jack, and there was a picture of the Harry Potter Bridge up at Glen whatever it is, Finlass. Glenfinlas?
No,
it's not that. Anyway, you know where I mean. Glenfinnan, that's it. And I went in and I had a look around there, and I thought, this is scary. So we were part of a group called Farming for Yes, which was during the 2014 referendum, and I spoke to the others about it. And another colleague and I talked about it, but we didn't have either the funding or the intellectual capacity to take this fight forward. But somehow we got Ruth Watson in touch with us. And Ruth has been at the head of this campaign to save Scotland the brand. And at every opportunity, all I've had to do is retweet Ruth and add little bits and pieces. And the brand took off. It was a wee while before I could get NFUS to accept that actually we needed to protect our PGI. And the same with James at Scotland Food and Drink. He was a bit more wary. He wanted to just make sure that we promoted the quality of Scottish food and not make it too political. But they've all been driven into it now, and now they're right behind the Keep Scotland the Brand programme.
Yeah, one of the things Ruth was saying to us is that Scotch whisky is kind of the Scotch Whisky Association manages their PGI independently. So Scotch, in theory, would be protected, but that everything else, every other PGI in Scotland is
vulnerable,
under direct threat from Brexit.
Right.
And it does seem to be something that the British government has just taken no real heed of.
But prior to that, I can remember Richard Lochhead being very angry one day and saying to me, "You would not believe, we're trying to promote Scotch beef in Japan." And the trade board down in Westminster are saying it's not a priority. And they wouldn't push it. He was kept out of all the discussions because Scotland is merely a region. And it's the same with the fishing.
Yeah, it's one of the real problems that we have is that we have this fabulous brand.
Yes.
Virtually anywhere you go in the world, you hear people talking about Scotland fondly.
Yes.
People know what Scottish dress looks like. People know the drink.
Yeah.
People know about the food.
And they know we're not behind Brexit.
Yeah. And yet the UK government does just seem uninterested in promoting that brand. It is a real worry. But so we will keep up with that story. But moving on now, I don't know if you saw the First Minister's TED Talk this week. Something quite unusual for a head of government to be doing. And she was talking about the well-being economy.
Yes.
This is something that's growing in popularity around the world. We've the Wellbeing Alliance has established relationships with these three governments: Scotland, Iceland, and New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern has really got into this and is probably the best known for it. But Scotland has actually taken a lead on this. I was involved in a project 9 years ago now at Oxfam with somebody who's now involved with the Wellbeing Alliance, Catherine Trebek, in doing this, in trying to define different measurements of the economy, measuring the economy not around GDP, not around kind of share prices and things like that, but around people's people's actual
Health and
lives, what makes
happiness.
what makes people's lives good.
Yeah.
So things like health, cultural access, having access to green space was an interesting one that came up. All these other factors of life that go beyond GDP.
Yes.
There's one US presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, has talked about what he calls human-centered capitalism. This idea of making the market work for people's actual needs rather than this GDP thing.
Yeah.
What do you think about the first of all, the concept of the well-being economy, and secondly about Scotland being a leader in that field?
I feel proud that Scotland is a leader in that field. And when I first was in the Rural Leadership Programme in 2007, two of the people that came to talk to us were Scottish Enterprise people. And they were just heading out to, I think it was New Zealand, because they were given the remit of looking into making GDP more realistic and more relevant. And it was all about, they kept talking about well-being and health. Now that was in 2007, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and nothing seems to have happened.
Yeah.
But then maybe it is, if Nicola is dealing with Jacinda and other people, Iceland, funnily enough, all female, yes, who have emotional intelligence, which again is another thing which has only just come up the scale and been accepted as being important in driving high quality GDP and better businesses. Better profit in business. You have to assess people on their emotional intelligence as well.
Yeah, it's to take the Prime Minister, for example, a man who is clearly very intelligent, but clearly doesn't have quite the same level of emotional intelligence.
Very similar, I have to say, to Theresa May. Similar but opposite. He's very flamboyant, artistic, and left side of the brain type of thing, but highly intelligent. She's the exact opposite. Highly intelligent, and I think both of them, I'd love to know what the autistic spectrum of each one was.
It's a very interesting question.
I've worked under headmistresses on the autistic spectrum. Highly intelligent, totally destructive.
It's a difficult thing to deal with people who are less emotionally literate, shall we say.
That's the thing. I mean, I love autistic people because they're so focused on things and they have a place in the world, but I don't think they make good leaders.
That's interesting. So if we are to pursue a well-being economy in Scotland, what kind of difference do you think that would make?
It's difficult to say because no man is an island, and outside influences will still impact on what we do in Scotland, but it could make us happier. It could make us recognise that we have value in ourselves, and once you recognise that you have value, then you instantly become happier and more productive.
Yeah.
And kinder.
There is an argument that goes that if you are engaged with your work, you're quite significantly more productive, and we know that vast numbers of workers now are not engaged with their work at all.
That's right.
Many of us feel very disconnected from the political process. We don't feel like we have any voice, and again, that's one factor that a lot of well-being economists talk about as being key to making the whole thing work, is having people able to express their political views and have those views responded to
and respected.
And So it's certainly a very interesting thing. It's something that I hope Scotland can take a lead on. There's a lot that Scotland has going for it that we tend to hide our light under a bushel a wee bit sometimes.
We do. There was a young girl on the radio this morning who had been in Holyrood, and she was waxing lyrical about the fact that these important people were actually talking to her, and they were interested in what she had to say and were prepared to take it back. And it reminded me of us as rural leaders in 2007, when we'd been to Brussels and we'd been down to Westminster and we were up in Holyrood, and a few MSPs were there talking to us, and they were fascinated by us and they wanted us to communicate with them. And Bruce Crawford, my present MSP, was there, and he'd just got in. And he was, quick as a flash onto me, and we communicated like mad, and still do. And it just helps you to feel part of a project.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's noticeable that it's 3 quite small countries.
Yes.
That are moving in this direction. Excepting, of course, if Andrew Yang should somehow win. I think there's something about Holyrood specifically, especially in comparison to Westminster.
Yes.
Where just not just the structures of the Parliament itself, but the kind of people who have been elected there.
Yes.
Are just much more accessible and relatable. And I think that does make a difference to the political culture of the country. Yeah. This feeling that you can speak to your MSP, you can talk to them directly.
Yes.
You can, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've bumped into Alison Thewlis.
Yes.
Just wandering around town. And, you know, I've always felt, I've only done it once, but I've always felt that I could just approach her and say, by the way, see this issue. What can we do about that?
That's right.
And I think that makes a big difference.
It does. And I know from years ago, farmers from over the border would say to me, you don't know how lucky you are being able to talk to your minister, Richard Lochhead. And we could, you know, I mean, even now I can just say something, send him a private message, and he'll get it and he'll respond, even though he's no longer in the farming side. But you build up relationships, and not just with that particular party, but with other parties. I have close relationships, even, dare I say it, with 1 or 2 Conservatives in Scotland who are farmers. But it's really fascinating, and I just love the size. We're lucky we are the size that we are. They would have to go into regions in England, I think, to get what we've got in Scotland, or indeed in Wales.
So on just one other wee story before we get to wrapping up. Choir Alba.
Yes.
For the first time ever last night, Scotland was represented as a nation in a Eurovision contest. This was not the Eurovision Song Contest. This was the Eurovision Choir Contest. So this was the Alba Eurovision Choir, directed by singer and broadcaster Joy Dunlop. It's the first time Scotland has ever been represented as a nation in a Eurovision event. Sadly, they didn't win. The top 3, if I remember rightly, were Slovenia, Latvia and Denmark. I hope I'm getting that right. Apologies to any other countries if I've got that wrong. But I just thought that was a really interesting story.
Yes.
That Joy is a fantastically talented woman.
Right.
Do you think, now this was something that was joked about as being mentioned in the white paper in 2014, that Scotland would be a member of Eurovision and would have an entry in the song contest and stuff. What kind of difference do you think it makes to have Scotland represented as a nation in these international events?
Oh, I think anything that puts Scotland as part of a greater being is good. I remember when the emojis put on the Scottish flag, and everybody thought that was wonderful. And you think, why didn't we have it before? And Wales has got its flag. When I used to take the kids down to international competitions between England and Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland and Ireland, in fact, and the Welsh kids always had their flag. And it was beautiful. It was white and it was green and it had the red dragon. And they had their towels, because it was a pentathlon thing. And their swimming towels had the red dragon on it. And I used to be so envious because we didn't have anything and we never thought to have it.
Yeah, it's. I think it's interesting. I mean, if an independent Scotland obviously would have a place in the European Broadcasting Union, in the organisation that runs Eurovision. Of course, we would need, ideally, a national broadcaster of our own for that. So Broadcasting Scotland will volunteer.
Good.
If that option becomes
From
available
little acorns.
We can only hope. And just finally, a very amusing story. Frankie Zapata, a French pioneer and adventurer, that's how I've got him described here, flew across the English Channel on a flyboard. 22 miles in 22 minutes, flying at a maximum speed of around 100 miles an hour. This just, I find this incredible. As somebody who grew up with Back to the Future, the idea that you can actually be on a board that flies now, I think is just incredible. And our producer here was suggesting that maybe it could be used, since he flew from Sangatte, where the camp is there, that we could just give them all to the refugees and they could all just leave France and just glide over to Dover in a swarm.
Yeah.
We thought that might be quite entertaining. Did you ever imagine that you would live to see a man fly on a board across the Channel?
Yes, actually, I did. Because when you think of being an arty person, Leonardo da Vinci with his visions.
Of course.
And we arty people have always got great visions. They may not always be practical, but the way technology is going, anything is possible, isn't it?
Well, it certainly seems like more and more of the things that I grew up thinking of as really cool science fiction really are now a possibility. I mean, we've got supercomputers in our pockets. I wonder
what his carbon footprint was. What kind of fuel was he using?
I haven't heard that. I will look into that, and if we have you back on, we'll discuss it again. So we are just coming to the end of our time. I would like to mention to all of you watching, producing TV programs like this is expensive, even though we don't take salaries at all. To allow us to continue making programs like this and to pay the bills to run the studio, we need more people to sign up as Broadcasting Scotland supporters. Your £5 a month or less, if that's all you can afford, makes a huge difference. Literally every penny counts in making us able to produce these shows. We're developing new shows. We are becoming more and more capable of doing outside broadcasts. We've been at virtually all of the All Under One Banner marches, and interviewing people there, getting a feel for what's happening in the movement, the independence movement. So do please, if you can afford it, obviously if you can't, don't, but do please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, the address is on the screen, and donate. We will always be free to watch, but if you can contribute anything to help us keep this up and running, it would be very, very, very welcome. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much to Daye for joining us. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for everyone for watching, and that has been this week's Full Scottish. My name's Kenny McBride, and we'll see you again same time next week.